finally to join me on stage. We've really covered a lot of ground in terms of the developments in hybrid solutions for the global mining sector. We've heard some really interesting case studies. We've had a few announcements today, and we've talked a lot about the economics and also about the drive to decarbonize mining operations, which is increasingly becoming an important part of the considerations as mines look at their different energy options. So now we're going to switch gears a bit. I'm really excited about this session. This is also going to double as a ReNew Economy Energy Insiders podcast. And we're delighted to have both Giles Parkinson and David Leach hosting this panel discussion and this podcast. Giles is the editor of ReNew Economy, which is the leading news source for renewable energy in Australia. And Giles and David host regular Energy Insider podcasts on a wide variety of topics, and we're really delighted to have them here today to lead this conversation on mining energy choices, pricing, and policy.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and look, this is going to be pretty interesting. I know we are the last event between you and drinks and then dinner, and it's been a long day, but bear with us. We're going to try and make a lively conversation. We've got four fantastic guests I'm going to introduce you to, and of course David, and we're just going to try and make it a joyful conversation and also get some feedback from you. But I'm going to introduce it now as though we're actually on the podcast, so you'll probably hear a few things which are a bit like you already know where you are, but I'm going to do it anyway. So here goes. Welcome to a very special episode of the Energy Insiders podcast. We are recording this live. We are in Perth. We are at the Western Hotel. We are at the Energy and Mines Conference. And we've got several hundred people here with us, and they're all hungry or thirsty for drinks and hungry for dinner, which will follow. But we've just had an extraordinary day, in fact 2 days, of discussions and presentations and excitement about the level of renewable energy and storage and the transformation that's happening, particularly in off-grid systems and particularly here in mines. It's really quite exciting. I think I count myself, some people might say I'm a bit of an evangelist or certainly an advocate for the renewable energy industry. I still try and tell myself I'm a journalist, but I've been quite surprised by what I've heard today and really excited about it, and I hope we can reflect that in our conversation today. Now, before I ask the panellists to introduce themselves, and we've got a menu of questions to go through and get some feedback from the audience, I'll first introduce my co-conspirator, David Leach, and I just want to make 3 observations, David. One, I don't think I've ever sat doing a podcast in such a comfortable chair.
3 more observations.
3 more observations, be fair. 2, we don't usually do this together, and you can probably see why now. And 3, I've been in Western Australia for 4 days now. No one has suggested to me that they should be building a new coal generator. Everyone seems to be very excited about getting as much renewables as they can into their off-grid mines. Have we come to the promised land?
Well, I think there's a lot of things to be said about it, Giles. The panel's got a lot of things to say. I learned a lot from the conference, as usual. It's always great to talk to resource people. A lot of background I have in research analysis and stockbrokers, and hanging around resource analysts always know that they know where a dollar is, and nearly as bad as investment bankers are not standing between them when you get hurt. I think the overwhelming feeling I want to get, besides all the detail that we've heard today, and I guess the increasing role of software and microgrids, because and I guess the batteries as the facilitating technology, it just helps to bridge the gap between diesel and the variable renewable energy. That stuff's all great. But I think the thing I just want to point out before we go any further, not so much to our podcast audience, but to the live audience, is just to remember about the decarbonisation theme, and to put the implications that has for China, which is the mining industry's by far biggest customer. 70% of China's 30% of global carbon emissions, all of their coal-fired electricity, which is 70% of the energy they get, most of it's been built in the last 10 or 15 years. That's all going to turn out to be a terrible investment decision. The price of electricity already in China is around $70 a megawatt hour. I'm Aussie. There's already lots of legacy, aluminium smelter captive power that pays less than that. But at the margin, that's what it is. It's using Australian coal. We're putting all the world's, just to throw a few more life facts out there, observations. All the world's coal, oil and gas produces about half a zettajoule, up a zettajoule per year, but the ocean heat content, as measured by satellites, is going up at 6 zettajoules a year. That's 14 times that rate, 14 times that rate. And the thermal inertia in that means that if we stopped it tomorrow, which of course we're obviously not going to do, we've put more in this year, it would still take 40 or 50 years to run out. So, whatever you think your shareholders are telling you about decarbonising today, they'll be telling you a lot more about it in a few years' time. But that's not really the big worry. The big worry is the guys you're selling all those resources to are going to run into a big problem down the track somewhere along the line, and that's, I'll leave it there.
Good stuff. It's time we introduced our audience, or have the audience introduce themselves. We'll start at your end, Dermot, and if you can all just go say who you are, what you do, and why you're here.
Thanks, Giles. Yeah, so Dermot Costello, I'm the WA Clean Energy Council Advisor, which basically is generic enough to encapture everything's kind of happening in the renewable space, but a major focus of my role has been in the emergence of the policy development here in the States. So when I seen the heading for the session and there was policy involved in it, I was kind of going, 4:40 in the evening, nobody's going to hang around to talk about policy. And it reminded me back the last couple of years. This is year 3, I think now, of the conference, and year 1 was so much enthusiasm, and the resource sector was sending out the renewable sector, and it was all kind of feeling each other out to see what it was all about. But the enthusiasm 2 years ago was fantastic. Last year we were met by, it's not really happening, what's kind of, who's doing what, and there wasn't a huge amount really of positivity we felt in the conference, which was basically summarised by the policy session last year. I don't know who remembers it, but we were having a very similar conversation when one of my colleagues took the huff and got up and stormed out. So I don't know who remembers that, but it was definitely an interesting time.
Well, let's hope that doesn't happen now.
And I just hope it won't happen, Giles.
Yes, maybe David might storm that, I don't know. Emily.
Thanks. My name is Emily Alford, and I'm a principal consultant with Oakley Greenwood. We are specialised energy consultants, and one of the things that we do particularly is assist miners to understand what their power supply options and costs are for remote power, and then also assist them through the process of actually getting that power through the best contracting terms and the best power solution that's available from vendors through a tender process. It's a very specialised procurement process, and one that not many miners really have in-house specialised personnel to do that. My background is a little bit in mining. I was with South32 for 3 years and commercially for the Cannington Solar contract for the whole power station and added the solar in. So that's given me quite a unique insight into what vendors are capable of, what contracting looks like, and a whole lot of lessons learned through that process. So it's been an interesting couple of days so far, listening to all the new projects that are coming up.
Thank you. Will.
Hi everyone, my name is Will Smith, so I'm the General Manager of Sunshift, and Sunshift is a subsidiary of Laing O'Rourke, which is an engineering construction company. So Sunshift is a solutions provider, so we build, own, operate low carbon power solutions for miners, and over the last year we've delivered a 3 megawatt system for the South32 Cannington mine, together with EDL, and that solution that we developed there was really a relocatable solution to overcome mine life challenges.
And Peter.
Hi, Peter Thompson. I'm the COO with Capricorn Metals, based here in Perth. My background is as a geologist, and I've been working on gold and nickel projects in Australia and Central Asia for the last 30 years. My interest here is because Capricorn is trying to develop a gold project, an open pit in the Pilbara, and we need a 15 megawatt power station, and we're very interested in the options available and very much appreciate it. the last couple of days, particularly yesterday, learning about hydrogen technology and how that might disrupt.
Let's get into this conversation. And look, we're going to do policy first, and I don't think it might not be a very long conversation, judging by what I've heard here today. We've just had a federal election. We've got a very unexpected result. I'm still trying to recover from it. I think the government's still trying to recover from it because they're as surprised as anyone. What does it matter? They don't seem to be developing on a policy, on a coherent policy on energy and carbon. Today we learned that the man who handed the lump of coal to Scott Morrison in Parliament is now one of his closest advisors, which is double up with his former Chief of Staff at the Minerals Council of Australia. Here is his, who's there now? Brendan Pearson and John Kunkel. Not too sure how controversial that is in a mining industry conference, but anyway. Dermot, let's start by what do you expect from the policy, and actually does it matter for an audience like this who are basically running off grid and can probably pretty much set their own rules?
Yeah, I suppose when Adrian invited us to talk about policy again, we frantically wrote about what we thought post-federal election would look like, and then we ripped it all up and came to the conference and said, who knows? And I was counting, I think policy was mentioned 4 times today, which is actually quite refreshing, which I think that's a pure indication, Giles, of what the audience believes our future looks like. But you know, from a federal perspective, we just rolled the punches in regards to the Clean Energy Council, and our focus now very much switches back to a state focus. So here in WA, we're spending a lot of time working with our different ministers on how they now actually recover from not following in under a Labour federal government, because I know a lot of the stances were going to be based on what the national stance would be. So they're kind of just reassessing, and I think there's a few comments made already today. We've now gone out looking at what the ERA around emissions intensive schemes might look like. But look, I think this industry has to be very much aware that there is a carbon mechanism not too far down the track, and it is going to form part of the discussions in the mid to near future. So it's definitely relevant, I think, for this industry, and maybe not just as exciting as the energy evolutions, but it is a part of the conversation.
It's important to remember, if you've heard several times today, that a lot of the pressure doesn't need a formal federal government policy. That would just make things easier, because as it is, shareholders and customers are all driving activity by themselves.
Well,
So, yeah, I think personally I'm very excited by the opportunity, almost regardless of what the policy setting is. I think if we just sort of step back and look at the Australian off-grid mining sector alone, so that's a sector that consumes 12 terawatt hours of electricity every year, and that's going to be increasing as a result of electrification. I think what we can expect through the drivers that are happening in the transformation in the sector, that over the next 10 years we will see roughly a 50% renewable energy contribution occur. So that's 6 terawatt hours that need to come from renewable energy. And my quick back of the envelope says that that's roughly going to be 400 megawatts of solar, 1.6 gigawatts of wind. So that's, for the renewable energy sector, participants in the room here, that's a $3 billion or so sort of pipeline of projects ahead of us over the next 10 years, and I think that's extremely exciting, almost regardless of what's happening in the broader policy landscape.
Emily, do you agree?
I do. I think, especially in the off-grid space, policy is almost irrelevant. And as David quite rightly said, shareholders and customers are what are going to drive behaviour. That and economics, of course. At the end of the day, I've seen this before, miners can have great sustainability policies, but if the economics don't work, it makes it really hard for them to make a decision to actually take that action. The fortunate thing is the economics do work now, and as I said before, at the moment, if you're burning diesel, you're burning cash, and on the east coast, if you're burning gas as well, you're also burning cash. Why haven't you got renewables on the ground? And there's a lot of reasons for that internally. I think a lot of it is internal process for miners, but policy in the off-grid space really, I think you said really, miners have got to make their own rules that are really required. It'll make life easier.
Peter, maybe you can tell us what the shareholders are telling you.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that the miners are really a spectrum from the very big end of town down to the minnows, and they've got different perspectives on this. At the big end of town, there's no doubt that carbon pricing is already factored in. At the bottom end of town, it's sort of smaller companies with market caps under 100 million. It's sort of survival from one capital raising to the next. And this isn't such a big issue. And if they're going to be off-grid again, it's not really on the horizon. But the other point is that I think everyone would welcome some more certainty and just get away from this year after year of uncertainty and policies getting rejected and not getting through.
Yeah. Can I ask just the audience, and Giles, if we talk about just does anyone here work for a company that has a shadow carbon price in their investment decisions? And if they did, could they just raise their hand? So a few. All right. Thank you very much.
That's fair enough. Okay. The next question is we've got the menu here about what needs to happen in any sort of market reform. So, okay, we'd like to have some sort of certainty at federal level, but in the mining area, so not everything's off grid. Some of it's connected to bigger grids, some of it's connected to the NEM. Dermot, what do we need, or do you want to see any sort of particular policy developments on that?
We're doing a lot of work on market reform here in the Swiss, but in regards to how it impacts the mining sector, resource sector, it's pretty minimum. Giles, past energy minister told us not to poke the dragon in regards to truck diesel subsidies, for example. So we haven't gone near that. So we're just working away with what we can control, which is, I think there's a comment there about 60% of the mines are grid connected, which now are Swiss connected is not huge, but we're working around what that looks like from a Western Power Horizon perspective. Bethwyn made a comment or announcement this morning about FMG building large transmission lines. So it is evolving. Whether policy is going to keep up with that is probably unlikely, but we will influence government where we can. But the concentric focus has been Swiss, Southwest Development Interconnected System priorities.
Emily, are you seeing more inquiries for your business for the procurement process that you met? I mean, are you getting busier?
It is getting busy, and it's actually interesting because we're seeing continually, and it's actually more from the mid-tiers and the juniors who are coming in, and they're being more willing to want to put renewables as part of their supply option. Obviously, again, it comes out to economics, but it's not hard to prove that case. So I find that those size businesses are really sort of on the forefront of wanting to push through into making those options happen. So I want to go back to market reform, because I do work in the NEM as well, and so it's a really interesting topic around whether we need market reform around getting more renewables on the ground and decarbonising. And I'd say that I'm not sure that market reform is going to drive that. But what I would say is that customers need to take more control of their own purchasing decisions. At the moment, a lot of customers, very large industrials, will rely on whatever retailers will offer them in terms of pricing and optionality. But there is the capability and the ability and availability of products that they can effectively source themselves and then just use the retailer for their retail license to operate in the market. So I think if customers take more control, that will drive the uptake of renewables and the more projects to be available online, providing, of course, you get a network service provider to give you.
One of the big policy debates that in West Australia should probably be held is, like we have on the East Coast, is the degree of decentralisation that you want versus centralisation. So historically, of course, it's been a centralised system on the East Coast with big generators sending out to the customers in one way. And that for renewable energy, which requires different transmission connections, that then you have to find a way to do that optimally. So that means perhaps it does mean building renewable energy zones and transmission and changing a whole bunch of rules. And for those people interested in the NEM, there's an incredible bunch of reform going on because we've now created 4 or 5 regulatory bodies, and each of those has to have a big regulatory agenda and keep themselves busy and employ more people. So there's an absolute army if you go to the East Coast. So I'd advise all of you guys to stay off grid and stay a long, long way away from the system.
But David, 5 regulatory bodies keeps us in business.
Phil and Peter as the Will and Peter. Let's close off the regulations and the rules. Anything that you need or you want to see there?
I think really just greater stability in policies, because that really provides the environment for businesses to grow and thrive. And I think a really good example of a period of sudden instability in the system was the recent Queensland rule change around having electricians required to mount solar panels. Obviously that was then reversed, but that is something that can really make life challenging for the solution providers.
Absolutely reversed, but now appealed by the government, so we're still waiting for that outcome. That's pretty mind-boggling, really, that one. Yeah. And that's pretty much going to dry up all new wind solar farm investments in Queensland, I would have thought.
Well, I don't know about that, but I mean, what does show in Queensland is that there's, I don't think West could not have a more divided state in Queensland between the allies of the CFMEU and the ETU allied with the far right of politics in wanting more coal-fired generation, and basically everyone else who wants less, and of course the unions, anyway, let's not go there.
Well, we could. I'm just wondering whether what does actually policy certainty mean in this environment? Because we seem to, the contrast between the discussions that we're having here, about people talking about 50% renewables and 100% renewable share for mines, people most concerned about costs and reliability, and the conversations we're having in the eastern states amongst the federal politicians just so far divided. So I don't know whether we're actually ever going to hope to get any sort of policy certainty. Is the best that we can hope for is that they just get out of the way and let other people get on?
I think when you talk about policy certainty, it's not necessarily about having a policy. It can also be about not having a policy. But the one thing that clearly happens when you don't have policy certainty, one way or the other, is it drives pricing up. Because when there's uncertainty, markets are priced at risk of that uncertainty, and so you continue to pay high prices. That's for sure. So for the longer we don't have any kind of certainty there, and people will just be hedging. When there's uncertainty, you diversify your risk. So it makes it really difficult from a procurement perspective to really bed down your strategy. You have to be, breaking things up and doing things differently, which is innovation in itself.
Again, the utility industry, which is what the power industry is basically loves certainty. It's based around a low cost of capital. Solar and wind, as has been said many times, particularly solar, has very low operating costs, very high certainty of costs. The capital costs can be predicted, but the cost of capital comes down to being able, the confidence that you have that the guy's going to pay you every year. And if I've heard it once, I've heard it 150 times. Short line lives are a real struggle, particularly if you want to build transmission infrastructure like Fortescue was talking about. And I think that's a big decision for the northwest of West Australia. As I said it once, I'll say it again, how much you want to contribute to having common infrastructure and the benefits that you get versus the fact that if you don't have it, you may be able to send your next door neighbour broke faster. That's fantastic.
Peter, so talk to me about decarbonisation and particularly international trends from customers. Presumably you're good at metals and are you exporting at all or planning to export? Or?
No, we're still at the developer stage, but decarbonisation is it's somewhere everybody wants to get to. Very interesting to hear about Kirkland Lake today and transforming a mine in Ontario to all their fleet is electric. And I often think back to when about in the late 90s, I took a South African engineer around WA mines and I showed him the super pit. And he looked over the edge and we saw all the haul trucks rolling up the ramp on diesel. And he said, why don't you use trolley assist? In all our big mines in Africa, we have electric trolley assist. And I said, I don't know, nobody uses it here. So it's just a mentality thing. However, that wasn't decarbonising because they were all using coal-fired electricity for those haul trucks. So that wouldn't help in this situation. But there's no doubt that, and right now in Chile, there's a lot of trolley assist used off gas, for example, and there's no reason why it couldn't be used here. In our case, in Carlowinda, we will be developing an open pit with a diameter of about 1 kilometre and a maximum depth of about 240 metres, so it's a big hole in the ground. And over 8 years, we'll have 10 haul trucks. And we went through the exercise of trying to get them off diesel and trying to convert them to gas. Each haul truck costs about $1 million. but we were shocked that there's not a lot of support in converting to gas, and the cost of conversion of each truck was about $200,000. So it was prohibitive for us at that time, but it shows it can be done. And before the election, everyone was terrified about what's going to happen to the diesel rebate if Labour gets in, and the cost of diesel could escalate massively again. And what's happening in the Gulf of the Straits of Hormuz now, it could escalate again. So converting to gas is a good thing, and it does reduce carbon outputs as well. So these are all interesting issues from our perspective.
It's also probably worth mentioning another example from a different state in the mining industry is the coal seam gas extraction in Queensland. Basically, that's been 100% electrified. It's all done with grid-connected electricity, which is still largely coal, so it doesn't achieve a decarbonisation goal yet. But because it's all electrified, if you change the underlying power source, it will be. Hopefully, will.
So I think in relating to policy, I think there's an important perception piece of Australia on the global stage in terms of its attractiveness for global talent and capital. So, last week, let's just look at that as a week. You've got, in Queensland, a new coal basin being opened up with the Carmichael mine getting its final environmental approval. But in that same week, in the UK, you've got the government enshrining in law a net zero carbon target for 2050. And that's, the UK being the first major economy to go that way. And I think, we should step back and think, what do we want Australia to look like to make sure that we are attracting the right people and investment in order to drive the transition we want to see here? And that does relate to the policy.
Guys, what do you add something about this sort of international push for decarbonisation? We did hear it during the day that some people are motivated by the fact that they're expected now. They're exporting metals, they're exporting whatever, equipment or products. There is an expectation now that it'll be low carbon.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, Giles. It was talked about several times today about the financiers looking right back down the supply chain as to where the origin of the material is going to come from, and it needs to be green. So green metals. So, the idea of going from where we're going to hydrogen to, a few people talk today about exporting Australian energy through metals is a fascinating thing. But it's back to Will's point about the international expectations and assumptions of what Australia will be doing, and then to realise that maybe we're not leading as much as we should be. So it is an international expectation that Australia will be in that place, and that's before we even talk about an international trading scheme, around carbon. But that's further down the track. That's a bit too much out there to blow people's mind at the minute, I think.
And then, of course, the usual positive arguments that people do-gooders, that is decarbonisers, trot out, namely that Australia's solar and wind resource is fantastic, particularly here in West Australia. I mean, I keep coming back to CWP's massive solar wind $20 billion project. If that could be lined up with some transmission, you'd have a completely different state to what you have now, but it would, doesn't work economically. And of course, the minerals extraction opportunities that batteries in particular, but also transmission wires, copper, aluminium, lithium, manganese, cobalt, nickel. I mean, these are all opportunities that I guess you guys have all looked at a lot of times.
That fascinates me, actually, this idea. I mean, we've been talking about hydrogen, we will talk more about hydrogen now, but this hydrogen idea that just based on export, and I think that's the way it's been sold, let's replace our coal and LNG exports with green hydrogen. But the point that was made by the guy from with the manganese mine, talking about, well, why don't we just do all the refining and the smelting in Australia? Because we get over that hump of we can produce hydrogen quite cheaply, but we can't ship it and transport it.
Well, that's right, and I haven't heard anyone suggest how the transport costs are going to be lowered, but obviously it has to be if Australia's going to be competitive. And so the idea is doing more minerals processing, which the Bloomberg representative talked about, and then she said it was because the price of electricity in Australia isn't competitive with the price of electricity in China. I want to tell you it is competitive. Because coal-fired electricity in China, I've said it once, I'll say it again, they pay a higher price for coal. The electricity price is around 70 Aussie. If you don't believe me, you can go and look at the quarterly statements of the state-owned generators, and they report the numbers there. And so, solar and wind in Australia is a perfectly viable energy source.
That's exactly the point that element 25 was making when about the manganese. Guys, you got anything to add about to what extent the people you're talking to are they thinking about hydrogen either as a storage thing in the stationary environment, as a mobile fuel, or even as a means to make big things?
I think in most of the conversations I've been involved with, obviously we've seen great experience curves on wind and solar, and really people are expecting similar experience curves for the electrolyzers. So, it's likely that those systems will decrease in capex by 70% by 2030. So I think people are thinking that it's coming, but we're just not quite there yet. I do think there's a great opportunity for it to be used locally, using it on our doorstep and avoid some of those challenges that we have around handling and shipping. But I do think there is an opportunity there. That there just needs to be some more work in order for us to get there.
I think it's interesting, the concept of hydrogen as a power source, or the fuel used for a power source, is still not something that's seen as is not talked about as a real world option right now. But what I find really interesting is that it's starting to creep into conversations about a possibility in the future, which hasn't really been there until the last, or even few months even. So it is starting to creep into conversation, not right now, but we're keeping half an eye on it. So,
and we're getting ahead of ourselves, maybe.
Well, this has actually been a really interesting thing, and it's come up several times today, is this concept that what customers want is actually ahead of what can actually be done right now. Hydrogen, obviously, economics, as always, economics always have to work in order to go ahead with any kind of new concept. But it's really interesting that for mining, which is quite often quite slow to move to new technology, the transition in energy technology and the change that's been so rapid in the last 5 years means that it's almost like becoming a bit less sensitive around thinking about new things and bringing new concepts into being, which is good. It's good for innovation. But yeah, it's interesting to see that sort of change in thinking. But as always, dollars are where it's at.
Giles, so you and I always talk about power stations and stationary energy because that's what we talk about. But I mean, over here, it's become very clear to me that transport is a big deal in the resource industry. And you've got two ways of decarbonising transport at the moment: batteries, which are a proven technology essentially, and hydrogen, which is for transport also a semi-viable situation. Again, if I could just throw it open to the audience, is it too early to ask an audience question?
Oh, we can ask an audience question.
I'm just wondering, has anyone done a comparison in the trucking industry between, say, a battery-powered truck and a hydrogen-powered truck, and worked out today, or even in a couple of years' time, which they think is going to be cheaper? No one's got that far thinking.
No hand's going up, yes. But let's go. Oh, we've got a hand. I think they're in the mix.
This is going to be a hydrogen answer, I'm pretty much sure.
Yes, it's waterproof from Sydney, so I think it will be.
Mr. Hydrogen.
So I've got a little bit of an idea. I mean, these fuel cell electric trucks, you may have heard of Nikola. They're introducing those into the market. These are road train trucks. They can get a range of about 1,000 to 2,000 kilometers. Depending on what's required. And the cost of the actual fuel is about the equivalent of diesel. The maintenance of these trucks is considerably lower than a diesel truck, but the cost of the actual truck itself is probably 2 to 3 times that of a diesel truck. So when you take these things into account, the fact that they are a new product coming into the market, I think they've sold something like 300 of these trucks to a brewery in the US, and we can expect probably these trucks to come to Australia in the next 2 or 3 years. They're fuel cell electric, they are hybrid, they're not only hydrogen, but they've also got a battery in there. And it's really about the range and the fact that they carry a big load. And that's going to be a hydrogen truck rather than a battery, because your battery, you're limited by range. 300 kilometres maximum.
I hear that, and that's a very good point. But on the mine site, you don't need that range, do you? If I look at what's actually been done around the world in buses, For instance, there's something like 600,000 or 800,000 buses, which I guess run short ranges before they get recharged, and as far as I know, they're nearly all electric.
Yeah, so on the actual mine site, I see a pantograph type system. Electrical dump trucks are going into the pit with this pantograph system, and if they need to come off the pantograph, battery is fine. So it will be a hybrid electrical battery. Potentially could have fuel cell and hydrogen on there if there's some form of range on the particular site, but it's really mine to port. Be it train or road train, this is where hydrogen will play a role, because you've got the range, you've got the distance.
Thank you. It's interesting, that stuff about range. Actually, I was talking to someone the other day about WA's recent decision to buy 900 diesel buses, which I think raised a lot of eyebrows. And I think
Don't go there. Don't go there.
don't go there, damn it. Well, the funny bit of information I got was that the reason why they were bought was because the rules say that they've got to have 400 kilometres or 350 kilometres of range. It was pointed out to them, well, most bus trips are only 30 kilometres. Think about it. So I think there's a way to go there. But Peter, you were shaking your head or nodding your head, and either talk to us about hydrogen or just talk to us about being a miner. And this sort of, if you did this 10, 20 years ago, you just go ahead, you get a diesel plant or a gas plant, whatever was more convenient, you buy a diesel truck. Now you've got all these options in front of you.
Yeah, very encouraging to hear those numbers on hydrogen of those trucks being used in the States. And also yesterday, very positive comments from Alana McTiernan, obviously very up to speed on this issue and supportive, and encouraged also by the initiatives that are happening within FMG and BHP on hydrogen. And if you think about what those companies have done in the last decade with going to autonomous vehicles, I think that the switch to hydrogen vehicles is a much smaller jump in technology for them than what they've already done with autonomy. And I can easily see them leading the path. And they're certainly not afraid of the new technology or leading the field. It's up to those, and the collaboration as well, which we saw that is happening too. Very encouraged by that, and it also makes me wonder, going back to my example of struggling with converting diesel trucks to gas in the Pilbara, when we've got so much cheap gas in the Pilbara, pipelines all over the place. Why aren't BHP and FMG, etc., using gas in their trucks? Well, the answer is probably that they've leapfrogged that already and they want to go to hydrogen.
What roles hydrogen playing in your thinking, Will?
Yeah, so I suppose we see it being part of sort of the new energy plant solutions of the future. So we are sort of factoring it into our considerations for design and sort of the systems that we'll be building, owning and operating. But I think broadly there is this whole wave of new technologies and commercial models which just didn't exist a few years ago, and I think it's really exciting to see that opportunity. Within a lot of miners, we're seeing new energy specialists coming into those teams. There are leading consultants advising them on how to do this. But I think really sort of something that resonated with me earlier today was Kirsten Rose's point from BHP, and in that there's all of us in this room. This is sort of our bread and butter. We know about this, but there's such an important role that we have of educating our broader organisations, because they're not all, unfortunately, avid readers of Renew Economy, Bloomberg New Energy Finance. We've got to spread the message around those new technologies to make sure that they understand what the economics of hydrogen are, what its future looks like, and spread that and be generous with that knowledge.
I do think the decarbonisation industry is the single biggest global industry. It's a growth industry. I mean, because it is such a serious, long-term global industry. I forget, there's something like 7 trillion, I want to say, US of coal, oil and gas produced each year. Most of which, if you accept the science, which I personally absolutely do, has to go away within about 20 to 30 years. That is just a massive amount of economic change.
I I agree as well, and I think that we're getting very close to a cliff edge, and people are like the proverbial lemmings. They're reaching the cliff edge and then trying to back away. And I think it's going to be those who, take a leap of faith first and be the front runners are the ones who are really going to be ahead of the game. But there is a lot of fear factor over the step change that will happen in energy requirements over the next 2 decades, which will go fast.
Do we have any questions from the audience at all? Anyone want to put their hand up and ask a question of either us or one of the things? Throw that microphone. We've got this wonderful microphone. The people on the podcast listening, we've thrown the microphone. It's wrapped in a little foam ball. It's quite cute.
Isn't it wonderful? This has been a great conference, John. I think we had much fun, not just because it's in the Western, but it's just at the Energy Minds conference. I thoroughly recommend everyone turn up next year. Question, please.
My name's Louis Kent. I'm with BHP, and my question is, can I please make a comment about the previous discussion around decarbonising fleet and material movement?
Please do.
So this is just sort of referencing stuff that's already out there, but maybe people in this audience aren't aware. There's the International Council of Mining and Metals has a program called Innovation for Cleaner, Safer Vehicles, and part of that is decarbonising surface fleet. The ambition statement is to have net zero emissions surface mining equipment by 2040. 2040 sounds like a long way away, but it's like 2 replacement cycles of fleet for a mining company. So everyone's been talking about the need for collaboration and the need to decarbonise material movement, and that's a great example of a large part of the industry. I think it's about 26 companies coming together with all of the OEMs as well to try and decarbonise material movement.
What's the thinking at the moment? I mean, what's the way forward? Is it going to be hydrogen? Is that already a good guess? Because we heard a lot about hydrogen, and I can see there's a lot of support. But for me, I look at the consumer market. It's all about batteries.
So the answer to that is we're very early in the journey. So it was only this program was only announced, or the ambition statements were only announced in October last year at the IMI conference in Melbourne. So we're working on it. So step one is looking at all of the technical scenarios. What is technically possible? How can you actually deliver the gigajoules that you need with the reliability you need and the intensity that's required to meet the demands of mining applications? But given the time frame, you've got the flexibility to think quite broadly about what does autonomy mean, how could the form factor of vehicles change, how can mining practices change. So it may be that to fully decarbonise material movement, you need to mine differently. That's how broadly we're thinking.
Interesting. There's another question down the corner there. Any comments on the stage while we're waiting for the microphone to be thrown?
No, this comment that we've got to go out and educate people. I mean, I don't know, this is such a big industry, you can only ever hope to know a little tiny bit of it.
Down the corner there.
Hi, Giles. Kirsten Rose, it's BHP's turn to ask questions this afternoon. Thank you. So I'm going to rewind the panel a little bit to the beginning of the conversation around policy. And, appreciate that what is policy certainty, what does it look like? We came very close to a neg, didn't get it. But what I'd like to ask the panel is if the policy fairies visit you and give you one wish for Australia, maybe each of the panelists could tell us what they think the one thing that they would wish for would be, what would transform Australia in this space?
Well, I'd like to have a new, like Mark Twain, for someone that never was a miner as far as I know, had the 2 most famous statements about policy. There's one statement about policy, death and taxes, and his policy about a mine, which is a bad joke. Probably everyone here knows it, so I won't repeat it, but I will. What's the definition of a mine? A hole in the ground was someone standing on top of it, So what I would wish for is a decarbonisation date, a time scale. The mechanism by which you get there is probably doesn't matter as much as just acceptance of the fact that it has to be achieved, and 2050 just is far too late, for serious decarbonisation from a science perspective.
Dermot and
I agree with you in large part, because by putting a date on it, people think they've got lots of time to get there.
We had a date before actually, but it got repealed.
Never mind about 2012, 2014. Anyway, so actually my wish would be to not have policy, to actually have government just step away from the whole issue around decarbonisation, because I think that actually shareholders will change the way that companies work. When you look at the demographics and you understand that baby boomers are getting older and quite frankly dying off, and you've got a whole generation that are coming through right now who are fully aware of carbon loading on the earth and what it will do to their future, not even their children's or their grandchildren's future, but their own future. And I have an 11-year-old daughter who asked me today, Mum, what can I personally do to change the way the world's going and how climate change is playing out? And that's an 11-year-old. By the time she's 18 or younger, she'll be a shareholder in those companies and directing companies the way that they will act, and that will be faster than policy, I think.
Do you have any
profound comments? No, I'm just still thinking that the NEG, although it wasn't ideal, was a hell of a good starting point to what could have been structured. So, and it is that carbon mechanism.
Except that was more of a mechanism without a target, wasn't it?
It was, Giles, but we had in the void of nothing. I still think that sort of carbon target is kind of what we need to be looking towards, because we've talked about it all day today. It's going to be the next generation that will kind of ask the question, well, what are we thinking?
Let's ask the audience, how many people here would prefer a target and how many people would prefer a defined mechanism? Let's put our hands up first for a target. Oh, probably a bit under half. And a policy mechanism? Oh, target wins.
I actually think a carbon price is a carbon tax. Not is the most certain thing you can have, easiest to administer, and provides the most certainty to business. You don't have to think about the emissions reduction targets or anything. You know what you're going to be paying well in advance, and provides the most certainty and revenue to the government to, no doubt, spend on something they shouldn't.
I completely agree with that. That would be exactly my wish, would be a price on carbon, and I suppose really, we just need bipartisan support. But just to carry forward from Emily's comment, I actually have a one-year-old, and came to the realization, really actually only just last week, that he is not going to have the opportunity in his sort of working career to make this change happen, because by the time he's 20, 30, that's 2040, 2050, we really need to get this going way before his generation comes up. So it really firmly sits with me and the generations that are working today to make sure we are driving the change.
Peter?
Just in one word, certainty is what I would ask for, and I think I speak for the majority of junior companies in the mining sector. The other point I'd make is that while it's valid to say that shareholder activists and insurers and other stakeholders might drive an agenda for mining companies, we must remember that not all mining companies are public companies. And there's quite a few private mining companies who have an extremely low profile, who don't have those same forces pushing them.
Interesting. Do we have one more question? Yes, we do, over there.
I'll just make a comment. I don't think you better push with insurance companies because they really don't care. The more damages, they just put premiums up. I mean, that's an extremely serious point to make. And actually, for someone who wants the actual facts of the matter, which sometimes hurts me, but I try to be honest. I had a conversation with a leading actuary, someone who's developing the has developed the climate change index in Australia just last week, and wants to transform that into a climate risk index, which is something that can actually be used for insurance policy pricing. And the insured amount of damages at the moment around the world from catastrophes, really, you can't statistically see it moving from year to year. That's not to say it isn't moving, because the annual variation is so high that the noise to signal ratio is very, very high, but you can't actually detect the movement in the mean at the moment.
Understood that. The question over there.
Afternoon, David Peffer from Lang O'Rourke. In the paper today, we saw nuclear power was a touch point again. Any closing comments from our panellists on whether that plays a role in the future?
I remember being a cadet journalist in the West Australian about 4 decades ago when Charles Court was talking about nuclear at the time, and it was as balmy an idea then as it is now. It's just extraordinary. Anyone who's actually looked at nuclear costs, which is great. I mean, there's no room to put one in WA, there's no room to put one in South Australia, you wouldn't put one in Tasmania, and the rest of the grid, I just can't see it. It's just ridiculous, but it's part of this sort of bizarre conversation that we're having. I don't know, I can't explain it. It's a massive distraction. I was frightened by a poll that I think came out today, was it, or maybe yesterday? 44% of the general public support nuclear, but with absolutely no knowledge of the costs and what that means. It basically, I mean, you wouldn't get a nuclear power station within 20 years here. We could decarbonise before then.
That's right. I mean, I guess all business executives, particularly in the mining industry, prefer low capex projects with short-term paybacks, you know. I mean, that's, anything where you have to develop, like I sat through the development of the LNG industry in Queensland, you know, and it took 8 years, and of course there were cost overruns, and you know, the oil price and therefore the gas price moved around so much. Well, you can just imagine how much change is going to go through with a nuclear power plant. Plus, it's actually operationally very unsuited. The way grid-connected power is moving is really all about flexibility, where most of the energy is coming from wind and solar, firmed up one way or another by various sorts of which demand response is going to be one part, and you know, batteries and pumped hydro and bits of gas and bits of coal. Nuclear power stations with their absolutely flat load, that's where the pumped hydro industry came from, you know, flat output, because it just to firm that up. And it's really a technology that, in my opinion, unless you go with these modern small nuclear reactors that are meant to be load following, but they don't exist yet, except in nuclear situs mines.
Anybody else want to add something on that before we wrap up and thank our audience and things like that? Let's just finish then on a really positive thing. What's the most exciting thing you found out, held out today, very briefly? Dermot, you've got 15, 20 seconds.
No, as an engineer, it's actually just fantastic to see the actual case studies. You know, we're actually starting to see wind and solar get on the ground with batteries. Probably the one thing that I've noticed, it's not the battery producers or the wind turbine producers sitting here, it's the guys who are implementing these solutions. So, you know, I think that's a fascinating kind of just way of dynamic, the way it's actually progressing, that the producers are actually sitting in the background and letting these guys get on it.
Emily, 20 seconds.
Most surprising thing is that the process of energy procurement still hasn't really changed, and we're still using an engineering project model. It doesn't really work, it doesn't allow innovation to come forward, it doesn't actually allow the best solutions to come forward. So I'd say, talk to me. But also think about that, it's not actually an engineering project, it's an energy project, different.
Will?
So I think with the fragmentation of the industry, potentially limiting historical uptake, that being addressed through some of these cross-industry collaborations, and I think Oz Minerals' announcement around their collaboration framework is very exciting.
Peter?
A couple of things for me. One was the fact that projects are seeing substitution in new power plants for mines in Western Australia, substitution by renewables without large grants. And we should move on from the DeGrussa example, which was almost completely funded by ReNew, and now we're seeing them that they're actually viable and standing on their own 2 feet, such as the Agnew one, which is great. And the other thing was the people looking at wind turbines for as little as 7 meters per second wind speed, and I was flabbergasted to see that they're putting 5 turbines up at Agnew, which I don't think is a very windy place. I've been there lots of times. But the other thing to remember about mine sites and height of turbines is that most of us have 40 or 60 meter high waste dumps already, so you might have an advantage already to stick one on.
David?
The solutions industry. So we've seen the hybrid model emerge. I already mentioned that batteries, you know, are not competitive for time shifting of energy yet, but they're doing great at doing the smoothing job out and smoothing the integration between the variable energy and the firming diesel power that backs it, or gas power that backs it up. So, and people shouldn't forget about the software that goes with that. There's an active software development. I think that's the main point for me.
Well, that's fantastic. Look, we're going to wrap it up there. I think we're going to move on to drinks and then dinner, and the people living on podcast can drop their kids off at school, do the washing up, get out of the garden or whatever. I'd just like to thank Energy and Minds Conference for inviting us to participate here. I hope you people enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for participating. Thanks to our panellists. And our regular sponsors, Watchers and Solar Ray Energy, without whom we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be doing the podcast. Thanks for all the fantastic support we've got back today and the feedback. And David, it's been a privilege to sit almost within touching distance of you, and we'll be back on remote next week, I think.
Got to be careful about that, but thanks, Josh.
Thank you very much. Bye for now.
That was fantastic. So we're now going to go to drinks. Dinner will be at 7 in here as well. And is Yana from LGFG around? Okay. We're going to announce another winner for the shirt lottery, and then we'll invite all of you to come and join us for a drink, and we'll carry on tomorrow with these excellent conversations.
Hi everyone. So the third winner for today for our beautiful spoke shade is Jeremy Ray. Is Jeremy here? Can I see him? No, I'll get in touch with him. Guys, the guys who didn't get a chance to win or didn't get a chance to enter the lottery will be here tomorrow, and later today. Come by our booth and leave your business card there, or if you don't have one, we're going to take a photo of it, and you'll be still eligible for the lottery. And have a great evening. Thank you.